Welcome to the Political Philosophy Podcast. I'm Toby Buckle. There's long been a debate on the American left over whether they should vote for Democrats, despite not necessarily aligning with them on every issue, and indeed perhaps not on many issues, or if they should abstain, either on principle, vote for a third party, or leverage the threat of abstention to try and extract concessions from Democrats. I've been involved with this debate for a long time, probably the whole Trump era, in fact, and I've taken a strong pro-voting position. More recently, I tried to add something to the argument, which was that the abstention strategy is in direct conflict with the replacing Democrats through primaries strategy, and given that they're in conflict, we should always prefer the primary strategy. It's not an argument in alternative to the more simple Donald Trump very bad argument, which I also agree with. It's just an addition, it's one more consideration. In making that argument, one thing people have challenged me on, and I think probably the best challenge I've gotten, is that I'm trying to impose a message discipline on the left in a way that is not possible. There is no pope of the online left. There are influential figures like Bernie Sanders or AOC and so forth, but it's not a body with a membership, and I'm trying to corral up a bunch of rowdy internet cats. And something that gets shared with me when people make that argument is, I think, the single best argument made of that style, "There will be no message discipline," by Liam Bright, which is the second part of the conversation that we're going to do today. This is, I think both me and Liam would probably want to stress, kind of a free-form, thinking it through as you go along sort of conversation. So don't absolutely hold either of us that these are like our definitive official positions. We're just talking through two articles that we both wrote that seem to be in contrast, but I think actually there's a way to square the circle there, or at least there is in my mind, but I'll leave the audience to be the judge of that. And hopefully, if nothing else, we kind of talk around the block a bit on this one, but it's at least a better way of having this sort of conversation than the usual everyone retreating into their own corners and yelling at each other that can sometimes characterise it. So that's what this conversation is about. I did it as a separate episode because it is completely distinct from the last episode with Liam, even though if you listen to the end of the last one and the beginning of this one, you'll notice they carry on directly from each other. They're different sides of the same sentence, in fact. But then I am reliably informed by experts that there are books in the Bible that begin mid-sentence. Leviticus is the continuation of a sentence from Exodus, and if God can do it, then we can too. So, this is Left Abstention and Message Discipline with Liam Bright.
In fact, weirdly, you say you get the "there is no message discipline" essay thrown at you, but that essay was written my intent, I mean, the author is dead, I guess, but my intent in that essay was to fight that narrative. Like, the thing I don't like.
It gets thrown at me when I take snipes at the Bernie movement. So the connection is this. I say to the Bernie movement, not the Bernie movement, that's unfair, to a minority within the Bernie movement who have come to feel that the Democratic Party is the primary enemy, right? To a minority of quite loud online people. I want to be clear, because that's something I've got pulled up on, if people say this is not everyone in the Bernie movement, and that's a very fair point. The that if they want a better Democratic Party, the people they need to persuade are the Democratic primary electorate. America, relative to the UK, has one great vice and one great virtue in terms of political organisation. The great vice is that is a two-party system that is structurally locked in a way that even in the UK it isn't, right? Like there are two options, and those are your options, and go fuck yourself, right? The virtue is whereas our candidates are largely chosen for us, the Americans do have an unusual degree of input in who the Democratic Party runs. And like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez was elected with something like 11,000 votes in her primary. Like you can change it. So anyway, my point to the sort of most Democratic Party hating element within that is if you want to change the Democratic Party, the way to do that is through primaries. And the way you are talking is almost designed to alienate the people whose votes you would need, right? And so then I get your essay put at me of like, okay, but you're talking about a cloud of people yelling online, and what do you want me to do about them? Which is a valid counterpoint. Right? So that's the context in which your essay gets shared with me. I think the separation I would make, and there's perhaps a conversation to be had about like how morally or practically salient this separation is in many ways the conversation I'm having there is like an intercoalitional one. It's about like how do we make the various pieces of the anti-Trump coalition speak to each other better, whereas the anti-woke one is very much, I think, just a victim blaming one. It's very much just a like, what did you say to make him hit you type conversation. I'm not I'm not saying to, the sort of online democratic socialists of America, like you deserve the bad things that are happening in America or that they're because of you. They're not. I'm saying as a matter of efficacy as a group within the Democratic coalition, here's how that could work better. But it's in that context your essay gets shared with me. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Fascinating. It's funny, like I've my personal take on this relates a little bit then to where I don't fully endorse what I was like in the white psychodrama essay, is related in some sense to what I do professionally. I'm an academic. Um, upon like the again, just assuming the audience won't know it, there is no message discipline. The point in that little bit of writing
Yeah, if you want to give an
uh,
overview.
was is just to say that look, if if people get any kind of personal sense of benefit from speaking their mind and just expressing how I see things, then almost the expected benefit of doing that, no matter how small it is, will almost certainly outweigh the expected benefit of any kind of strategic, carefully phrasing things in order to be message efficient for a political movement. Because you almost certainly make no difference to the overall perception of your political movement, right? Like you're probably not that big a deal. Even if you are, if what the opponents are doing is finding someone saying something wacky and then spreading that out, which is like what I think is happening with the anti-woke. You will never be able to stop that because there are so many other people in the political coalition of you that you can't control what they're all doing. You just don't have that kind of power. And so you won't really shift the perception that your side is full of wacky, terrible people by yourself not being wacky and terrible as the other side would see it,
Hmm.
because they can always find someone who is. All you'll do is you'll limit your ability to say what you think is true and important in the way that you want to say it, and the calculus will never come out in favor of so being self-limiting in that way. And my thought was therefore it would like the whole genre of essays, which and this is why I could do now see the connection, which are aimed at trying to like police the expressions of your own coalition in the hope that it will make the other side stop hitting you, um, is fruitless. My own takeaway from this has been something like, um, I think maybe, as I'm saying this to you, I might be changing my mind. But my own takeaway was, I think maybe democracy requires the following kind of non-strategic behavior of each individual person should always, in some sense, non-strategically just advocate for what they think is good and true. Because even though each of us individually will thereby not be behaving optimally in some sense. On net, what we get out of that is, it's the usual argument for aggregating opinions. Net, what you get out of that is a lot of independently offered perspectives, which we can now take into account in the social decision-making mechanism and do better. And so like I think in virtue of there being no message discipline, it's like it's just not my job. Like I'm not someone who's a professional political agent in any way. It's not my job to try and make my team look good. It's my job to try and say things which I think are true and beneficent and propagate things I think are true and beneficent. That sometimes that'll be strategically wise, sometimes it won't be. And in so doing, I can at least take comfort in being like, while I personally am not behaving optimally, I'm contributing to democracy, which is the best system, I think, for making social decisions. So th this was what I thought. So like there will be no message discipline, but there's a sense in which the anti-strategic behavior of just saying what you think is true and wise will be will turn out for the best on aggregate or something like that. Um, and I guess the reason I'm changing my mind as I say that is like, well, if I think that strategically it never is good, like if I think that I should like override my individual incentives in order to like get the best outcome, doesn't that mean I should actually start trying to do message discipline? Because I just gave that argument about the calculus never coming out that way. Whatever, who cares? I'm just rambling. Um, so like that's my thought anyway. I've taken away from this that I should just say things I think are true and wise and won't do that. I think a lot of the online left, their problem, I don't think they're going to be very responsive for what it's worth, to what you're saying, because I don't think they care that much about appealing to the Democrat primary electorate.
But
So,
they desperately want to win primary elections. They definitely do that.
I think they want, yeah,
I mean, some don't. Some just want to yell online,
yeah.
sure.
That's the
But
thing.
I don't want to say they're all wholly just yelling online. That perhaps might be a bit unfair.
I don't think it's. I mean, okay, but I don't. I mean, like, I, I am. I think it's good relative to the options available that Mamdani is going to win. Probably, inshallah, is going to win the New York mayoral election.
He will. I mean, not to 100%, but like
Yeah,
85,
yeah,
you know.
I'd bet on it. I think that's good. I don't think I could have done any behavior which affected the likelihood of that happening or not happening, right? So even though I think it's good that he's going to win that thing, or I would have preferred it if Corbyn had beat Boris Johnson in 2019. And so I also like there's one where I think I lost and I think I was going to lose. I sort of had a sense of that going into the election. I also didn't think I could make a difference. And so it's not the fact that I don't condition my behavior on what would be effective for Mamdani winning now or Corbyn winning in 2019 isn't because I don't care. It's just because I think I have an accurate sense of my own significance. I'm not at all significant to a New York mayoral election, not even in, look, I'm in New York, but I'm not in New York. And I am in the UK. I was in the UK in 2019, but I'm not significant enough of a cultural force in the UK. So I think it wouldn't be, someone wouldn't be being overly cynical if they accused me of like, you just want to shout online, you don't care about winning. I think they were, yeah, accurate, like in some sense. Like, I don't think I can make a difference to what wins. I just think I can make a difference to how I am online. This won't, of course, go for everyone. Like, you know, Corbyn can make a difference by how he behaves online to whether or not Corbyn wins. Mamdani can make a difference, and those are maybe the unusual cases. But like, if you're the editor of the New York Times by their personal decisions can make a difference, right? So
Mm.
I'm not saying everyone has this calculus, but like I personally, and you personally, and almost all of the people listening to this thing, yeah, I think it's reasonable for us to just want to shout online. That's all we're doing.
I think it's a very reasonable argument, and I'll link to the paper, but you have a little table of like will win, won't win, and shouts online, doesn't shout online. And you see, yeah, shouting online just always comes out on top. But it's like
Yeah.
once you put it in table form, yeah, no, that works. Here's my response, and I wanted to talk to you about this because people have like shared your work at me in this case a number of times. So I think it's a good challenge for me of why do I buy the message discipline argument in the case of woke? Like I can have my criticisms of woke, sure. I'm not going to try and message discipline every person who goes too far online. I'm just not, and I don't think it's useful. Why do I buy it in that case? And yet, by my actions, it is revealed. I do not buy it in the case of scolding the socialists. Um, so two things. In the woke case, it strikes me as even if you achieved message discipline, it wouldn't do anything. Like, even if you got everyone to stop using obtuse and confusing social justice vocabulary, it's not as if the Ben Shapiros of the world would suddenly start being charitable to us. And that's where people are getting their information from. It strikes me as both a bit of a herding cats endeavor, and even if you got the cats to march in line, it would have just been a waste of effort. So it's like doubly useless. Um, that doesn't strike me as true to quite the same degree as in the sort of democratic intercoalitional sense, whereas in fact quite small changes in behaviour might lead to quite big outcomes. Like I say, AOC 11,000 votes. I find it very plausible to think. I spent a lot of time in that New Republic piece with the 2020 Democratic primary, which Biden won quite comfortably. I don't think an alternate history where if the left did something differently, they might have won that. Is that wild? But there were a lot of unforced errors there. And that will be a big outcome, right? Having that as the presidential candidate in a winning election, assuming I'm right about that there was an alternate history. I think the other thing that is, I think your argument relies on the agent being described in the argument not having significant messaging reach themselves,
I
right?
call them
That
some schmuck. Yeah.
yeah, I'm a small bean to use the
Yeah.
internet's language, right? So like it is different from Andami for an AOC, right? And I'd almost posit that perhaps both of us are somewhat middle cases on that. We're sort of approaching the point where maybe we have enough messaging reach that actually these sorts of concerns might be salient. Because who am I trying to reach with that New Republic piece? And is it the guy with Vape Stalin 420 on his username and like 19 followers and 100,000 tweets? No, right? It's I'm trying to reach mid-level people like me who like collectively actually have a little bit of input into like how people and potentially apparently left candidates have read that essay. So like I'm trying to reach them, right? The mid-level people. They're like people who might run for office or the people who might have some cultural clout online. And I think it like did make a bit of a register and a bit of like it got shared very, very widely, I say, to pat myself massively on my own back. But like it did make a bit of a register. Um and people it was very widely shared after the Mandami victory of like this is the way forward. This is what it looks like to take Toby's advice. So I don't know. All of that kind of adds up to me feeling a bit differently about it. But I acknowledge you're never going to round up all of, the people with usernames like Chairman Meow. Like that's not going to happen. But I think there can be a degree of irresponsibility amongst the me's of the world. Let's say plus 10,000 followers on social media, but under 100,000 or under 250,000, maybe, that sort of range. Where, like, actually, we, meaning lefties who shout about social media online, have a bit of impact in how people, because we set the tone on social media. And like, it's very easy to do a tweet dunking on the Democrats or dunking on liberalism and get a load of likes, and God knows I've done that. But in many ways, by accepting that culture, we've set our own movement up to fail. Now, maybe you don't agree with my argument that we've set ourselves up to fail bit, but just assuming I'm right about that, in that approach to politics has made us less palatable to the Democratic primary electorate, who that is part of their identity, they're partisans of the Democratic Party, then it's at least worth thinking out loud about we, here meaning the sort of mid level commentator class, how we might do better and we might make a sort of collective sacrifice, quite a small collective sacrifice, to maybe not have tweets that get as many likes because our audience is primed to hate Dems, and maybe even get yelled at by our audience once in a while because they feel that we're selling out. But these are very small prices. Um, in order to use our collective messaging power, which isn't massive, but it is there, to use our collective messaging power more wisely. It it's a margin argument, but like that's sort of how I think about it, and that feels in my head meaningfully distinct to the woke case, but I'm happy to be told it's not.
Right. If you think, I mean, so I recall there's a few things, right? So I recall your, I mean, we spoke about this online, but like I recall your podcast episode on the eternal primary.
Yeah.
I think I told you, like in my household, because of, like I said, I've got family in New York,
Mm,
and my partner is an American woman, and so the eternal primary is very much felt. You captured something real, I think, with that. And when you go through what you say, like the strategic mistakes made where like plausibly the left might have won and then failed to, those mistakes were being made at both staffing and personnel levels, and then also
mhm,
by the behaviors of very high level staffing personnel. Those are people who are not some schmuck, right? Like,
mm.
so they are sort of definitely not in the scope of the messages. Like those people, absolutely.
Yeah.
You are a professional political agent. It is your job to think about how to do that well. If you do not do that thing well, you are simply incompetent at the thing you're meant to be doing, right? So,
Mm,
they're in complete agreement. Then there's the things that like is the woke case distinct, partly because of the sort of double uselessness. I have to admit, I don't really feel the pull of that distinction because something that won't happen because you can't bring it about, and something that, per impossible you could bring it about, but then it still wouldn't have the effect you want.
mm.
Um, those are just two different ways of being, they come to the same point when it's
Right.
impossible. So I don't feel that distinction very strongly. The second one, though, where like, okay, this is aiming at a subset of the electorate who are already sort of like primed to agree with you more. What's more, even relatively small in the grand scheme of things, agents can be influential in setting the political culture of people who speak to that small group. And so maybe there is a broader class of people who should have to worry about their influence there because of who we're trying to influence and how many people are involved in this ultimately. And that might include you and me, in fact. That's interesting. I do find that plausible. Yes. So I kind of did have in mind when I wrote that. I mean, it's just a blog post, and even the table is kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, right? But like,
Mm,
I had in mind national elections. I was thinking of like the scolding, like the Corbyn voters of the 2019 election, or like that
mm,
kind of thing, right? So the scale I was thinking at just makes there, so to speak, the requirements on being, as you put it, a mid-level agent are much higher, and so there just aren't many of them. If I think of like Democrat primary, I mean, I wrote,
it's quite a small pool in
yeah,
many
exactly.
senses, you know.
And so I guess if you just think of this in my head, first, the basic logic of what you're saying that once you zoom in that way, it does increase the number of people who should actually think of themselves as like, no, you are an agent who makes a difference here. That argument no longer applies to you. I
Mm.
think that's correct. I also think it's correct that you, as in you, Toby Buckle, are plausibly amongst those people, especially recently. I get an impression, you tell me, I kind of get an impression your career's been taking off a bit recently. You've been having
I'm not sure I'd call it a career, but I've had a few articles
yeah,
saying,
your
oh,
your ability to get reach is taking off, a bit that way.
yeah.
Um, and so like, yeah, you might well be that person. I think personally, I'm running into a couple of things, but it might just be emotional blocks for me personally. One is that I take seriously role responsibilities as an academic.
Mm,
And I really don't think my like I am not an agent of any political party. Like it would
mm,
be bad for me to be like party political. So I really actually think it's like, inappropriate for me in particular to think too carefully about securing the strategic advantage of a party or a faction within a party
mm.
in deciding what I put. I think my public role is best fulfilled by like suppressing that thought in some way, like
Mm.
actually. So that's partly just me personally. I don't, but does that actually speak against what you said? I'm not sure. And the other one is like, even if I did, I probably wouldn't identify with anyone in the Democrat. But this is where political differences between us might make a difference. Like, I prefer Mamdani to win than who the likely alternatives were. So I'm happy about the outcome relative to what I think is possible. But even the left faction in the Democrat Party, if I had to act for someone, it wouldn't be them. Like, so
Really?
yeah, no, I don't like, I agree with what you said about like the US system is locked into a two-party system in a really strict way. Electoral politics in the US really does have to go via, um, like you sort of rather than have viable parties, what you do is you do factional inbred fighting in one
Yes,
of these actors,
exactly.
right? And so I fully accept that like that's how electoral politics in especially high-level US government, federal positions in US government or larger state positions, it all has to go that way. Um, and you know, I do not see in any way like I wouldn't express. Well, no, when I was in America, I was actually in the DSA for a while, so apparently I make a lie of myself. But on the whole, my impression, I just I wouldn't see my task as supporting that thing. I just have maybe let me put it this way. I have a very strong sense of my own insignificance relative to these systems, and so like really don't see it as like I wouldn't get involved in supporting this thing because it's gonna continue regardless of me, and the best use
It
of my
depends what you mean
ever
by
has.
get involved and supporting, because like I'm not trying to make the argument that you, Liam Bright, need to adopt my exact posture with respect to the Democratic Party. One, you're not in the States, and two, um, yeah, there's this sort of I'm an academic thing. Our positions are just different. I'm more just giving you a self-justificatory narrative.
Honestly.
Like I'm just giving you a this is why I don't think, while I find elements of Liam's argument compelling, I don't think it's a straightforward defeater for the project I'm trying to do. That's sort of all. My concern was much more limited. I'm saying I think it's okay what I'm doing. I'm not saying everyone else has to join in. But by support, you mean get involved in actively crusading for. Like you would presumably still vote Democrat to block Republican if you're in the States.
Well, I mean, it depends literally mean. I mean, I can't vote, right? Like so. But
In a hypothetical.
yeah, like
Yeah, because that's the extent to which I would ask people's buy-in is
yeah, it's
you have to show up for an hour every 2 years. Like I don't think people have an obligation to like use their political voice, as it were, you know.
it's fun. Well, I'm also just because it's the same inner logic. Because I even called the no message discipline blog post. I call it the paradox of posting in direct reference to the paradox of voting, right? Where
Mm.
like there is also the argument of it's extremely rare for elections to be decided by one vote. The time you spend doing that, like I don't know, go buy some Bitcoin. Like, go
Yeah.
spend that time doing anything else that will probably have higher expected value. So, like, Bitcoin is very selfish. Like
I
why?
think you just can't think about voting through that frame.
Well, I
I
mean,
mean, you can,
I
but I
think
don't think that's the argument. I don't
well, I
think
think but the point is like that's like I'm just saying like if we're in the mode of thinking through the logic of my there is no message discipline, I have to be being honest about that means the same argument actually says Bitcoin's a dumb example. I shouldn't have said that. Like spend that time giving to charity, doing something pro-social, and it will probably has a greater expected benefit than the time spent voting. Like, obviously, if everyone followed this line of argument, then it wouldn't go well. But just like the paradox of posting, it matters that not everyone is going to follow. Like, I'm very aware that me saying this on this podcast
mm,
will not make everyone stop voting. And so I think I would be a bit moved by that. That said, in my life, I do in fact often vote.
mm,
So apparently, I am, despite what I'm saying here, I am sufficiently subject to social pressures, what I think, my family would think of me if I didn't, something like that. So I think if I was in America, I
Also, just
would vote.
collective responsibility. I think that's a thing. I think we're not pure individualists. I think we're not pure libertarians living in a Randian world. The individual expected value framework is one framework through which we can assess the rationality or perhaps indeed morality of actions.
I
And
think
it's a good framework and it's a useful framework and it has a lot of use value. It is not the only framework
the
through which we
collective
can evaluate.
responsibility. I mean, but why does that speak in? So the collective responsibility, I guess, is the thought that like by participating in the vote for the preferable candidate, I'm taking responsibility for avoiding the worst candidate. That's the response. That's the thought.
It's yes. I mean, so here's like my view at the end of the day is where I would come down to is you could have two frameworks for how you assess there's two common frameworks that are just juxtaposed through the morality of voting. One would be the pure individual, and the other would be the societal. So the pure individual, I find it hard to make that argument get off the ground, especially in a large country like America. When you scale down the election enough,
Yeah. Fully, yeah. For very local elections, there's a clear case of that. Yeah.
I'm happy to just write that argument off. The society level one seems conversely equally overwhelming, at least in the states where the difference in utility between the two main parties is quite large. Right? Like one outcome is clearly preferable to the whatever our misgivings about the Democratic Party might be, one outcome is clearly preferable to the other. I would suggest and I'm not even in the argument of suggesting one of those frames is always right and one of them is always wrong. Those are just two different frames you can analyze the question with, right? I would suggest there's a middle one, which I find more interesting and where I'd spend most of my time, which is part of smaller groups within the electorate. These could be demographic or they could be ideological. So I think a lot of the time when we have the voting debate on the left, implicitly, we're actually not debating within either of those frames, either the individual or the societal. The debate that we're often having is what should we as socialists, what should our philosophy as socialists be with respect to this act? And I think there is a thought there, and it's not an errant thought, that if we as socialists, as a collective, decide that we want to do an inside strategy and compete within the Democratic Party, that's one option. If we as socialists decide that we want to do an outside strategy and sort of leverage abstention as a threat, that's another strategy. But whichever of those strategies you're going to go with will be more effective if there can be some collective action behind it. I think that's the thought. And I think when you actually look at the voting debate, never mind like what's the correct framework in any sort of ultimate philosophic sense, how it actually occurs is most of the time people are debating that mid-level frame. How should we, as an ideological, regional, demographic, and of course the boundaries of these are always quite blurry, but nonetheless, how should we, often just as the left, how should we as the left collectively approach that? Which is a conversation I'm definitely in. And the more I think about it, the more I think the way people talk about this informally might be the right frame. That actually people don't think about it with this like individual level expected value thing. That's not the arguments that are actually being made. But nor are they thinking about it at the societal level a lot of the time. They're thinking about it at these like subgroups, and the more I think about it, I'm not wholly sure that's wrong.
Yeah, I think maybe I actually I simply do find the individual one more intuitive on a personal level. Like, if you ask me if I have done the right thing, I find it very counterintuitive to sort of think in terms of assessing something I had no control over. And again, it's the Stoic point. I do find it very intuitive to assess how whether or not I've done the right thing, just in terms of what did I have control over? Did I use my agency to bring about a better or worse outcome, and assess myself accordingly? And I mean, the Stoics wouldn't even put it like that, but that's how I do it. And that thinking on these other levels, I agree that's not what people are doing. So certainly, I don't think what I'm saying connects up that much with debates about should the left vote or not. that's not what people are doing. But it's just how I think about it. So if you ask me what I
Even the people who think we shouldn't vote don't tend to express it that way. They
no, no,
tend to
no.
express it as we on the left would have more power if we abstained. That's how the argument tends to be put.
Exactly right. And so that seems correct to me. Yeah, I mean, so I guess then in terms of these, what I actually think in response to this is the left should have mechanisms to coordinate its behavior and then an ability to actually have a party line. Because yeah, what I would like really, I guess maybe if I think in these terms, I'm still doing things in individual terms, but I would like it to be the case that I know of myself that my behavior and how I decide to do this thing is strong evidence of how my group is going to decide to do this thing.
Hmm.
And so like I know that if I abstain, it's for strategic reasons. I'm not just like, wasting my time throwing the vote away and leading to the worst outcome. The abstaining is actually in this case a path to leading to a better outcome.
Hmm.
Um, and I think in contemporary American politics, typically, yeah, I mean, the abstention strategy probably has it's probably not actually done that much, doesn't make much of a difference. But the worry is that in the contemporary American politics, the abstention strategy is never organized and disciplined enough to actually discipline the Democrat Party into doing good things. All it does is lose at the occasional election, which tips things into worse world. Maybe with Trump, it lost them the last election they're ever going to have. Which I don't actually think this will happen, but like that's the worry. I take it. Um, so yes, I would advise people not to do wildcat abstentions because I think that's a waste of everyone's time, and also I think the big fights about it are a waste of time. Why do you think it's a good way of framing things? It strikes me as it's a means of everyone shouting about stuff online, which doesn't actually. Everyone's arguing about stuff that's not really in their control.
The mid level?
Yeah,
Well, for one, we're starting with where people are actually having the debate. That's not nothing.
that's like the old joke, I wouldn't start from here.
You look around the world at any set of debates that we're having. Would you start from here? Like, we are where we are. There
Yeah,
is, as you have said, like, you can think that there's some grand Hegelian logic unfolding. We are where we are, and we're having the conversations that we're having. That's not, you know. Um,
was the
I,
pity.
but to take your point,
Yeah.
it is. And I mean, socialism is a great case. Socialism has always assumed some sort of collective mechanism, and that, like, we as a group are stronger together. And we, they don't necessarily mean the whole people, they mean socialists. That doesn't seem wholly wrong to me. If you say there's two worlds,
But
what
hold on, hold on,
we're
hold on. We're materialists, right? We believe in. I also don't think it's just socialists. It's just the proletariats, workers. But we believe in creating conditions which will allow us to actually coordinate our actions and act collectively. Like it strikes me as a thing which the socialist tradition is correct to reject as idealism, to be sort of think in terms of like, well, what would be good if we were able to coordinate our behavior? I should act like that. Well, you can't.
right, but you're not, in this specific case, you're not purely assuming. We're not starting from a point of everyone's thinking purely individually, and then, oh, but wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of collective binding action? There is an informal collective binding action. People very clearly are thinking in terms of what would it be best for the left to do as a whole, right? And I'm throwing in my 2 cents of what I think that should be, along with a lot of other people, you know? But people, I think if we weren't, here's a better way of putting it, if we weren't in the reality in which people were already thinking in that sense, then the argument would become much weaker.
Mm.
If everyone was already thinking individually, then I could say, okay, it would be a better world if the left bloc thought, at least to some degree, or perhaps even implicitly, collectively. But then you could turn around and say, okay, but we're not in that world, and the cost of bringing us into that world might be too high, or it might just be impossible. But given that we're already in that world, where people are thinking about it collectively, given that that's the starting point, whether or not you say you would start from there, it seems not a ridiculous project to me, especially if one has a medium-sized voice, to try and make arguments such that those collective decisions are wise and efficacious.
I guess here's my own sense. I haven't looked, there is a literature on this and I haven't looked into it much, so Apologies to anyone who
No,
knows.
so you sort of just run into like my wheelhouse here, so
But
apologies.
like it, but it's my guess is my thought about why people vote, and indeed maybe why I vote, is very rarely, even these strategic hubs, there are people having them online, but people vote because they have some sense of civic duty, because they see it as expressing stuff they care about and so on. And so the way to get like the sort of all the way in meeting people where they are is ready to give arguments about what would be best for the left to do strategically. It's to make the candidate seem exciting and like someone who you would like to, in some sense, participate with, or make the candidate or make the project, depending on if you're person or group focused. Um, and so that's the thing that will make a difference here. I guess you could see this indirectly. You're intervening on this by you like if Toby Buckle, could see myself as what I'm doing is persuading leftists that you are not betraying something important to yourself by voting for this candidate you have mixed
Mm.
opinions about. Right. Yeah. So fair enough. Like that's the level on which the intervention makes sense to me and sort of meet people where they are. It's just that, um, yeah. So maybe initially I was thinking too much in terms of would I personally be inclined to do that? And the answer is no. But then I personally am somewhat shy and I don't like getting involved in things, and so probably my answer just reflected that I would find that uncomfortable.
Yeah, but I don't think my argument requires that you either you
Yeah, no,
right
I
or
misread
you
it as I was thinking
more broadly are required to be like actively you. My argument requires that you vote, and even then only in a general, right? Like if you want to support the progressive in a primary, great, but I wouldn't go to bat for that in quite the same way.
wait.
You know?
So why? What I think it really is. To me, the smaller scale the election, the better the case for voting, because the more the chance that you actually make a difference through your vote. Like,
Um, yes, although the outcome stakes I think are probably lower. I certainly prefer a progressive candidate to a mainline one in a primary, but that difference is lesser than the difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, say. I mean, also, I do find the global society level thing compelling, and I think that is a conversation that I think we have the conversation at different levels. I don't find that, look, this is just a terrible outcome and we all have a collective responsibility to avoid it. I don't find that uncompelling as an argument, you know? I think it's all three. I think there's a broader picture of like, should you vote? To which it's the sort of society level Donald Trump bad. Um, I think that argument becomes much more complicated, say, in the UK, where you have an increasingly very right wing Labour Party, but also a fractured party system and regional variations and whatever. Um, then there's this separate case, which is I'm trying to say potentially to the left abstainer, in addition to that overall societal obligation, there's this sort of mid-level set of concerns that I would at least draw your attention to, in that I think it is a if your goal is to if your goal is to try and change the Democratic Party to make it more progressive, which is your stated goal, the strategies of competing in primaries and abstaining are in direct opposition. They mutually undermine each other. Abstaining makes you toxic to primary voters, right? So you have to choose one, I think. That's my argument. And given that you have to choose one, the primary strategy is so clearly preferable.
yeah, I see. Right. So your thought in this kind of argument is that
I'm giving an additional reason. In addition to this general societal obligation, it also is strategically serving your stated purpose of transforming the Democratic Party.
so
That's,
is the thought here that like if you sort of say I abstain from the general, I threaten at least to abstain from the general because I think normal democratic politics is so objectionable. I wouldn't want to be a part of it. I'd only want to be a part of it if it first changed in this way. And
yeah.
it's strategic for me to do because that way, because they might need my votes, they'll go more in my direction to try and appease me. Right? That's the thought. And you're saying that if you say that thing and associate your favored candidates with that attitude, what Democrat primary voters here is the thing that I am an enthusiastic participant in and identify with, you normally find horrifying. You think people like me are horrifyingly bad. So like I kind of hate you now because you just told me that you hate me.
And that, to be clear, that's not me saying that. That's Democratic primary
Yeah,
voters.
yeah, yeah. You are saying that because that's how they'll hear that thing, it's actually not strategically wise for you to do that because you just make your own candidate toxic.
Yes, and it's not just like people online. There's relatively senior. Well, so there's Bernie himself has sort of floated. He's always endorsed the Democratic candidate, but validated that rhetoric in a number of important ways. There's also quite high level people in the movement who are abstainers. So Nina Turner is a good example, didn't vote for Hillary in 2016. So it's not just randos online. But if you ask people, which I did, I interviewed 24 Joe Biden 2020 primary voters. Why did you vote for him? Why not Bernie? One of the first things they'll go to is the left abstain. They don't quite put it like that, but they say they undermine us, they undermine the team. Like
Mm.
they make us lose. What they do in their eyes is spend all their time yelling online about how bad the Democrats are. They depress our enthusiasm, they depress our turnout, and then we lose because of them. And then they don't even vote at the end of the day, and we lose because of them. Now, you might feel that the Joe Biden primary voters are wrong to think that. I don't think they're not pulling it out of nowhere. Um, and so, yeah, this is where it runs into the message discipline problem of like, if we weren't doing that, I think we would be much more viable with Democratic primary voters because what's stopping them isn't policy. These are not conservative people or even moderate people. They're very progressive. These are the most progressive 10% of the electorate.
Mm.
They're maybe not full command economy socialists, but they're very progressive relative to the median voter.
Well,
So
the
it's
actual
not,
PSA members, not a command economy socialist stuff.
sure, but it's not that, right? And so my logic is for abstention to work, it would have to be coordinated, it would have to be public, right? It can't just be me in the privacy of my own home. I've decided that it doesn't meet this expected value thing. No, no. The Hillary Clintons of the world would have to get that there's this sword of Damocles over your head, right? But to do that, you'd alienate the Democratic primary vote, so their intention. And my argument is the number of people you'd need to make that abstention strategy work is much, much larger than the number of people you need to win primary elections.
I see. I mean, I guess what I'll say then is, having heard your argument, I haven't thought. You're right. This is very much more your wheelhouse than mine, so I haven't thought about this as much. So I don't. You're relying on some empirical facts, which I don't know if I
Mm,
have any independent access to them, put it that way. Um, but conditional, I find that persuasive. I mean, because like yeah, like my opinion is that things like the abstention strategy, this is to be a materialist rather than an idealist. They have to be coordinated and organized, otherwise it's just a flight of fancy.
yeah,
If you are right about the relative degree of like sort of if what you're saying is true, then if you could organize a successful abstention strategy, you could just take the party via primary anyway. And trying to organize and failing to do the abstention strategy makes it way less likely you could take the primary anyway. So just focus on taking the primary. It's
yeah.
I would for what it's worth, that seems persuasive to me. I mean, I don't. Why do you get so much pushback on it?
Um, so no one likes being told what to do,
Yeah,
and no one likes
neither
having
do
their
I. So, like,
identity
fair enough.
attacks. So I think this is why I've dragged you into my wheelhouse. Is in many ways I find the most compelling counter argument to my case yours, right? In that there's other counter arguments and I can give them. So for instance, people might say the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans. I don't find that particularly compelling. I think there's clear outcome differential there.
Yeah.
So that would be one set of counter arguments. Another is the left is increasingly convinced that the Democratic um, primary system is rigged against them. That this is, as we say, an aftershock of the eternal primary, in which there are elements of how the 2016 primary was conducted that were not fully above board, right? And this is an aftershock of that. So their point is your approach of like trying to contest primaries won't work because they wouldn't let us win anyway. And I think they've run with that concern too far. Certainly, when you're a primary challenger to an incumbent, that is a structurally inferior position, no doubt, but it's not an unwinnable one,
Mm.
right? It's certainly we have way more ability to change the Democratic Party internally than we do the Labour Party,
Yeah.
right? You know? Um, so I don't find that argument. I think that argument is based on something that started with something real, but has kind of almost become a conspiracy theory. Although one not helped by, say, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries refusing to endorse Mandami. He'll win anyway, but that did not help. Anyway, I think the argument I find compelling against my position is, which is why I was excited to talk to you,
Oh.
but you're trying to impose message discipline and like the concerns you raise about message discipline, right? Like that's the pushback I get that gives me some pause.
Well, I mean, yeah, but like I feel like I'm sorry for disappointing, but like, I feel
No,
like
no, I'm very pleased that I've at least got you to say to see no, that this is the logic of the argument. I do think it's different. Now you've caveated that with that's dependent on some empirical claims, which I think it very much is. Right, like I have to be right, for instance, about this is how Democratic primary voters feel. I have to be right about the relative sizes of these things in the coalition for my argument to hold. But
so
I've at least
I'd say what I say for the message discipline relevant point is like I think you are correct. Once you're at the stage where you're publishing articles in the New Republic, right?
hmm,
Um, then you making this statement is not the thing I was talking in my blog post, and there's a case made in my blog post that's kind of self-undermining, but is like person A in the mentions of person B or in what was then Twitter,
hmm,
it's Rob Blue Sky now, I guess. Um, where like that's the kind of scale where I'm like, you person A trying to chide person B has no reason to listen to you. This is a
hmm.
pointless use of your time on social media. Publishing an article in the New Republic is a bit different because at that point it does become a coordination device, like saying like, hey, here's a salient position to rally around for at least a few thousand readers. I mean, and at the scale at which primary is happening, a few thousand readers is a significant proportion. So I don't think it runs into that because you are not just some schmuck at that point. You are in fact saying things which it makes sense for you to impose on yourself. I should say things which I think are strategically wise if the group were to adopt them, because you can influence at scale whether or not the group will adopt them. So I don't think the message discipline really applies. It doesn't apply to you when you're writing public facing pieces on this. But if, Toby, you have the vice of getting into random fights with randos on the internet.com, it applies to you at that scale.
I've weaned myself off it.
Okay, well, so like so far as you're successfully winning yourself off it, I don't think it's as fair.
I
But
think
if
that's
you're
the
in someone's mentions, I think it would be fair. I mean,
I think that's the point where like I think I have to let the logic of this land is I can say to Vape Stalin 420 who has 100,000 tweets and 29 followers, look, this is my logic for like this very aggressive pro-abstention stance. I don't think is very good. All the reasons I just mentioned. But like if he's out online still posting it, if I'm showing up and arguing with him, that
exactly.
is not a good use of my time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unless I happen to enjoy that for its own sake, but no further consequences coming out of that. I think that's where I have to let it land, is I have to yeah, this was good because there is a tension there that needs to be resolved. In that, what I have to absorb from your argument is like when I'm talking, I am doing so in the capacity of not a hugely important person, but with a bit of voice, right? And in some senses, I'm talking to not a general audience, but actually just other people with a bit of voice and trying to get us to coordinate. And like if other people in the general audience happen to agree with me and want to come along, great. But that can't be my primary objective. Like I can't think about what I'm doing as trying to corral the cats
Yeah.
on Blue
Exactly.
Sky.
Yeah. No, no, I think that's right. Like, there's a reason as that there will be no messages from post. There's a reason it's just a blog post, and also it's a tongue in cheek. Because I sort of saw myself. This was me. I'm just writing for like things that annoy me on twitter.com.
Hmm.
Rather than have to make the same thread a bunch of times in response to a bunch of arguments, I'll just write one blog post and I'll link to that blog post every time I'm inclined to have that argument on Twitter.
Yeah.
But like at some level, like therefore, it's like aimed at a bunch of individual conversations with like some rando. Where this is my very long-winded way of saying I can't bother to argue with you. I don't. That would not be a good use of my time
Yeah.
either. Um, and yeah, I never really in and as and what's more for what it's worth, the thing I had in mind was kind of I would say I think this left wing thing is good, and then someone who I think you always term reactionary centrist would give some version of like you're scaring the hose like in response to that, and I'd be like, I'm just fucking saying things I'm like, leave me alone. Was like, you are not you. It is not a good use of your time to try and persuade me to stop doing that. It won't work, and I have good reasons not to. But I don't think. I think if I was publishing in the New Republic or the Atlantic or the New York or the Guardian or whatever, at some point it would become a good use of my time to start thinking what would
Mm.
be good for influences in our movement to rally around. I'm going to advocate for that. That is a perfectly reasonable use of your time. Yeah. So yeah, what I think is conditional on the empirical facts being as you say, which I really don't have any independent access to, so I really can't endorse. Um, the logic of your argument seems right to me, and I don't think it would be a good rebuttal of your more upscale public pronouncements that they are sort of like fruitlessly trying to impose message discipline. And the reason for that is the argument of the message discipline thing kind of presupposed you are not talking at that kind of scale or in an election with you can plausibly influence people at that kind of scale. So, yeah.
But it's a good caution for me to not, in my arguments, assume that, like, the people I'm directing them at, as it were, are the randos online. Because I think I have said stuff that definitely could imply that. That's a good caution for me to take, I think. Like,
I
this
mean,
is this is this is a coordinating conversation between mid-level people, essentially.
I think though that on an emotional level, right? Like I think a lot about our contemporary political life is not an original observation, right? Lots of people have done this, but I just think it's true. A lot about contemporary political life is everyone, from quite high level people to, you know, unimportant schmucks like us. We all spend our time constantly being irritated by like, yeah, yeah, whatever, yeah, Chairman Meow 69, 420.
Yeah.
Um, and like that person's kind of annoying. And I think a lot of people end up reorientating their political life and their opinions and I think like negative polarization
Yeah.
against like that person. I'm not saying you're doing this. In fact, like I said, I actually kind of endorse you doing, well, conditionally endorse you doing what you're doing. Um, but I think it's like understandable when human and many people have in fact found themselves like devoting an extraordinary amount of their time.
I think a good amount. I don't really buy that the right is a backlash to the excesses of the left, but I do think that the reactionary centrist tribe, a lot of them got there because they just find this person so annoying. And
Yeah.
like, listen, I don't dissent; they are annoying, but like, you can't. And I have experienced those people face on because they did not like what I had to say about some of the Bernie movement. But like, you can't make that your entire political identity. You can't let that push you into becoming a centrist dipshit.
It's funny, like I have pulled back in the other direction. Because of where I started, I initially online found myself like the most annoying centrists were like, not like major figures, like randos online
Yeah.
here to tell me that actually I'm very unreasonable and they're the only sensible people on earth. And I did initially find myself negatively polarizing. This is many years ago, but like when I was first in
Hmm.
grad school, like in 2012, I found myself spending more time online because I'd moved away and this was my way of keeping in contact with people. And then I was encountering that a lot, given where I was. That's who gives me pushback. And I've spent some time negatively polarizing against that, saying how much I hated these people, how much I'd. And eventually I realized that it's an Epicurean point. Not Epicurean, Epictetan point.
Hmm.
Like I'd given all control of my inner life over to these people. Like
Hmm.
just saying no to them is still letting them set the agenda and even the content of what I'm saying. And it was like a big moment for me to. So I keep coming back to Stoics. Like that was actually the use of it for me. It was like a big moment for me to realize that I've surrendered control of something that actually matters to me, to these people who like I avowedly despise.
I
Um,
feel like that's just an ongoing journey of like not letting your intercoalitional allies, which we all are in the age of Trump, like reactionary centrists are part of the coalition, the most extreme dipshit leftist part of the coalition, is not letting them get under your skin. I feel like I've never had a moment with it. I always have to just go back to that. Don't, when you're making arguments in your own head about what you should have said to someone and just to let that go.
yeah.
You know, like, I feel like I have to, I feel like I'm pretty good at being not overly deranged by it, but I feel like you just have to continually remind yourself of that. Like people online are going to do what they're going to do, you know?
Same. And it's difficult. Like I understand why people can lose that fight, and at times I've lost that fight myself because it is difficult. Because yeah, and the weird thing about Trump being Trump, and I've imagined Farage when he gets into power in the UK, being Farage, if I was in Italy, like Maloney or Orban or Modi, this rising action movement, they're so terrible by so many metrics. It kind of like I accept I'm going to be in coalition of people I find very distasteful because I really fucking hate Farage, and I will accept that resisting this hashtag resist, remember that. Resisting this is a thing that's worth making a grand alliance, you know. I always think about, exaggerated example, but something to it. World War II has, the American apartheid state, the British and French empires, and Stalin on one side, and that's the good side. Um,
Yeah.
and like it's just because like the Axis powers were that bad.
But that's very much how I see it.
Yeah, no, same, right? And I do kind of
Like,
see that I grant that, and I accept it. And we're not in as extreme a circumstance, obviously, but I the same inner logic applies now.
but that circumstance kind of almost makes the walls close in, and you all have to live and breathe
Yeah.
together. And like, this is something I'm increasingly interested in thinking and writing about. Is like the various just psychoses that wall's closing in has created in the sort of anti-Trump coalition.
Yeah, I think for right now, I mean, the UK, we're in an interesting position right now because Starmerism has this element of there was a kind of element of explicit dishonesty in how Starmer positioned himself, which was rewarded for a while. And it was very effective at defeating the left. And then they took on the Tor once they captured the parties, they took on the Tories who just were broken at this point, like running on fumes,
Hmm.
stormed the country, and then have like really not shown an ability to use power effectively once they've got it.
Starmerism seems to me, and it's interesting as like an American US UK dual national, like my moral assessments of the Democrats and Labour are quite different. It's Labour much worse right now, honestly.
I would agree.
And it seems like they're getting the worst of both worlds.
Exactly, right? They seem to be they're a weird combination of politically very ineffective in the way that the whole thing the moderation's meant to give you is like, I get to be a savvy, effective political agent,
Hmm.
but then also morally and effectively, just materially very bad. And
Yeah.
like, it's just like, why on earth have they chosen that? Um, so why did I bring this up? I guess I would just say Starmerism strikes me as very unsuited to have the kind of leading role in the anti-Farage coalition that presumably they're planning on running the next election on, unless the Tories get together. Um,
They can't be like, the more I think about this, I'm not saying Labour can't be the ones leading the team. I think this Labour cabinet can't. Like, I just don't see how. Because look, I have, as much as really anyone, gone to bat for haranguing lefties to vote in the States publicly, and I've been in fights over that. And like, my position, as you pointed out, is dependent on empirical facts. It is dependent on the Democrats being wholly preferable. It is dependent on the totality of the two-party system there. In the UK, we now have a government that's well to the right, not just of what he was running on when he was like trying to replace Corbyn, but of previous Conservative governments, right? And also in which our party system is just bonkers. So the logic of what I'm saying, and like I'm not recognizing this as a point against, this is just something I think. Like the logic of what I say in the UK, US case just breaks down here, doesn't apply. Like, and we're going to have to find a way to that coalition. But whereas in the US, I view the Democrats as a sort of imperfect umbrella under which we all have to go. In the UK, we almost have to do it in spite of the main centre left party. So let's pause it there. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. That was great. I really appreciated being able to put our pieces have been put in tension online a few times, so just to be able to talk it out was great. In closing, is there anywhere you'd like to direct listeners to go? Blue Sky website, anything like that?
No, I'm not good. If you can avoid me on the island, that's your benefit. I won't do that harm to you.
Follow Liam on Blue Sky, everyone. All right, cheers for coming on, mate.
Okay, thank you.